Hey everyone, thanks for being here. If you're enjoying this, hit that subscribe button and leave a like. It really helps. Drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what you're doing right now. Are you working? Driving? Trying to sleep? Let me know. Quick summary before we begin. A Vatican linguist gets called to investigate after a cardinal violently attacks someone during a private mass. What he discovers in the secret library changes everything he thought he knew about evil, possession, and his own fate. This one gets dark. I've spent 23 years translating documents that most people don't believe exist. Aramaic contracts describing trades that violate natural law. Akkadian tablets detailing rituals that predate known civilization. Coptic gospels so disturbing they were buried beneath other buried things. The Vatican keeps specialists like me in quiet offices with locked doors, and we do our work without asking why. Until 3 weeks ago, I thought I understood my role. I was wrong. It started with a phone call at 2:47 a.m. Father Dominic's voice was steady, but I heard something underneath it. Something like the sound of ice cracking under weight. "Dr. Reeves, we need you at the Apostolic Palace immediately. There's been an incident." I'd been summoned before for emergency translations. Ancient curses found in newly opened tombs. Threatening letters written in dead languages. Once, a series of photographs showing graffiti in a dialect of Syriac that hadn't been spoken in 800 years. But Dominic had never called me to the palace itself. What kind of incident? Cardinal Brennan had an episode during evening mass. He's asked for you specifically. My stomach tightened. I'd met Brennan twice, both times at academic conferences where he presented papers on early church history. He was 71, sharp as broken glass, and known for a temperament so even it was almost supernatural. The idea of him having any kind of episode felt fundamentally wrong. "What do you mean, asked for me?" "Just come, doctor, please." The Vatican at night is a different place. The tourists are gone, the gift shops shuttered, and the buildings seem to exhale. Old breath, older secrets. The Swiss guards at the entrance knew I was coming. They didn't meet my eyes as they waved me through. Father Dominic met me in a corridor I'd never seen before. One of those passages that exist between the public Vatican and the real one. He looked like he'd aged 5 years since I'd seen him last month. His clerical collar was crooked. "Before you see him," Dominic said, walking fast enough that I had to hurry to keep pace, "you need to understand that what happened was contained. 6 witnesses, all priests, all sworn to confidentiality. The official report will say cardiac event. That's the story." "What's the truth?" He stopped at a heavy wooden door with iron hinges that looked medieval. Cardinal Brennan was celebrating a private mass in the chapel of St. Lawrence. Halfway through the Eucharistic prayer, he stopped speaking Latin, started using something else, something none of us recognized. His voice changed. Deeper, like there were 2 people talking at once. The hair on my arms stood up. "Glossolalia?" "No." Dominic's hand was shaking as he reached for the door handle. This was structured, grammatical. It was a language, Dr. Reeves, just not one that should exist anymore. "Which language?" "That's why we called you." He opened the door. The room beyond was small, probably a priest's private chamber. Cardinal Brennan sat in a wooden chair, his wrists bound to the armrests with leather straps that looked disturbingly well used. 2 other priests flanked him, their faces gray. Brennan's vestments were torn at the shoulder and there was blood, not much, but enough, dried on his collar. When he saw me, his entire body went rigid. His eyes were lucid, painfully so, and filled with something I'd never seen in them before. Terror. "Dr. Reeves," he whispered. His voice was hoarse, scraped raw. "Thank God. Listen very carefully because I don't know how long I have." I moved closer, ignoring Dominic's hand on my arm. "Cardinal, what happened to you?" "It wasn't me. Not entirely." His breathing was shallow, rapid. "During the Mass, I felt something, like a hand reaching through my ribs, grabbing hold of something inside me. Then I was watching myself from somewhere else. Watching myself speak words I don't know. Watching myself." He stopped, his jaw clenching. I hurt Father Timothy, threw him against the altar with strength I don't possess. I could see it happening, but I couldn't stop it. One of the other priests, a younger man with a bruise blooming across his left cheek, nodded slowly. That must have been Timothy. Can you remember what you said? I asked. The words? Brennan's eyes closed. Fragments. It's already fading, like waking from a dream. But I remember. He spoke 3 words, harsh sounds that seemed to vibrate in my chest. The language was familiar in the way a childhood nightmare is familiar. I recognized the phonetic structure. That's Enochian, I said quietly. Every priest in the room went still. Enochian, the so-called language of angels supposedly recorded by John Dee and Edward Kelly in the 16th century. Most scholars considered it an elaborate hoax, a constructed language with no historical root. But I'd seen documents, tucked away in the deepest archives, that suggested otherwise. Documents that described Enochian not as the language of angels, but as something that existed before angels, before the division between sacred and profane. There's more, Brennan said, and his voice cracked. When I came back to myself just for a moment before they restrained me, I saw something. A memory that isn't mine. A book, chained to a table, pulsing like it was breathing. My mouth went dry. Where? The library, the one beneath the... He stopped, his whole body going rigid. His eyes widened, pupils dilating until the iris was almost invisible. No, not yet, please. Cardinal? Dominic rushed forward, but Brennan's gaze locked onto mine with terrible intensity. His lips moved, forming words with painful precision. Find the chained book. Before he returns, you have... Then something left him. I don't know how else to describe it. It wasn't visible exactly, but I felt it. A pressure in the room that suddenly released, like a hand lifting off the back of my neck. Brennan's head fell forward, unconscious, his breathing settling into an unnaturally deep rhythm. Get him to the infirmary, Dominic ordered. Tell them sedation protocol 7. The priests unstrapped Brennan and carried him out. His head lolled, and I saw marks on his neck, small circular bruises that formed a pattern. Not random, deliberate. When we were alone, Dominic turned to me. You understood what he said. The Enochian. Some of it. The words translate roughly to carrier, fragment, and threshold. But without context. He mentioned a book. I nodded slowly. Chained to a table, in a library beneath something. He didn't finish. Dominic's expression was carefully neutral, but I'd known him long enough to read the tells. The way his left hand kept touching his pectoral cross, the slight twitch at the corner of his mouth. There is a library, he said finally, one that isn't on any official map of the Vatican. Most people here think it's a legend, stories told to new archivists to keep them from getting too curious. But I've seen the entrance once, years ago, when Cardinal Voss was still alive. He made me swear never to speak of it. And you're telling me now because Cardinal Brennan used his moment of lucidity to call for you by name. Because whatever happened to him is beyond anything I understand. And because... He pulled a folded piece of paper from his pocket and handed it to me. This arrived at my office 4 hours before the incident. No return address. No indication of who sent it. I unfolded the paper. It was a photocopy of a manuscript page, the original text written in medieval Latin with marginal notes in what looked like Akkadian. The handwriting was cramped, frantic, and the content made my hands go cold. The subjugators were warned. Do not bind what cannot be broken. Do not chain what has learned patience. They ignored the council and proceeded with the rite of fragmentation. The entity submitted, but submission is not defeat. It scattered itself, seeding its essence in vessels of influence, and now it grows strong on their sins. Below that, in modern handwriting, someone had written in English, Dr. Reeves will understand. Let him see what we've been hiding. I read it 3 times, my mind racing through implications. Who are the subjugators? I don't know. I've never heard the term. This says they performed something called the rite of fragmentation, that they bound an entity by scattering it. And if Cardinal Brennan was carrying a fragment, then it's not in him anymore, I finished. It left him, which means it's somewhere else now. We stood in silence for a moment. Then Dominic said, I can get you into the library, but if anyone asks, this conversation never happened. The Cardinal had a stroke. You were never called. Am I clear? Perfectly. He led me through a maze of corridors, down 3 separate staircases, past checkpoints where he exchanged quiet words with guards who looked the other way as I passed. We ended up in a section of the building that felt older than the rest. The walls were bare stone, damp in places, and the air smelled like earth and something else, something chemical and bitter. Myrrh, Dominic said, noticing my expression. They burn it down here to mask the smell of old parchment decay. Doesn't really work. We stopped at a door that looked like part of the wall, its outline barely visible. Dominic produced a key that looked too simple for what it was opening. Just old iron, no special markings. But when he turned it, I heard multiple locks disengaging, a sequence of clicks that suggested much more complex mechanisms hidden behind the stone. I can only give you 2 hours, he said. After that, the morning staff starts arriving and questions get asked. What am I looking for? A book, chained. Brennan saw it for a reason. He paused. Dr. Reeves, if you find something down there that frightens you, and I think you will, remember that knowledge is neutral. It's what we do with it that matters. I wanted to believe him. The door opened onto a stone staircase that descended into darkness. Dominic handed me a flashlight, industrial, heavy, the kind used by police. There's no electricity past the 3rd landing. The switches were removed decades ago. Why? Because someone decided it was safer that way. He didn't come with me. The door closed behind me with a sound like a coffin ceiling, and I was alone with the beam of my flashlight and the sound of my own breathing, too loud in the confined space. The stairs went down farther than they should have. I counted steps out of habit. Archaeologists training always know the way back, and stopped counting at 217. The air grew colder, and that bitter myrrh smell intensified until it coated the back of my throat. At the bottom, the stairs opened into a corridor lined with shelves, but these weren't the neat, organized shelves of a proper archive. These were makeshift, built from mismatched wood, crammed with books and scrolls and loose papers that seemed to have been thrown together with no system. Some of the shelves sagged under the weight. Others had collapsed entirely, their contents spilled across the floor. I swept my flashlight across the space and froze. Every book I could see had been damaged, not by time or neglect, but deliberately. Covers torn off, pages ripped out, spines broken, and on almost every visible surface, someone had written the same phrase over and over in different languages. Do not read, do not speak, do not remember. My hands were shaking. I forced myself to move deeper into the library, stepping carefully over fallen books and loose pages that crunched under my feet like dead leaves. The corridor branched, then branched again, becoming a labyrinth of knowledge that someone had tried very hard to destroy, or at least discourage anyone from accessing. Then I heard it. A sound like breathing, deep and slow, coming from somewhere ahead. But it wasn't quite breathing. It was more rhythmic, more deliberate. Like a heartbeat if a heartbeat could echo. I followed it. The corridor opened into a circular chamber, maybe 20 feet across. The walls were covered in frescoes so old they were barely visible. Faded images of figures in robes, hands raised, faces contorted in expressions that might have been ecstasy or agony. And in the center of the room, on a stone table that looked like it had been carved from a single piece of marble, sat a book. It was chained to the table. Thick iron chains, wrapped around it multiple times, secured with a lock that had no keyhole. But that wasn't what made me stop breathing. The book was moving, not much, just a subtle expansion and contraction, like lungs filling and emptying. And with each pulse I could feel it. A vibration in my chest, syncing with my own heartbeat until I couldn't tell which was which. I approached slowly, the flashlight beam trembling in my hand. The book's cover was leather, dark with age, unmarked except for a single symbol burned into it. I recognized it from my studies. Ancient Sumerian, one of the oldest written languages. The symbol meant to bind or to contain. The chains rattled softly, though I hadn't touched them. I set the flashlight on the table, angling it to illuminate the book. My hands hovered over it, not quite touching. Every instinct screamed at me to leave, to run back up those stairs and forget I'd ever seen this place. Instead, I opened it. The chains didn't stop me. They shifted, loosening just enough to let the cover lift. The pages inside were parchment, covered in text that seemed to shift between languages. Latin bleeding into Aramaic, bleeding into something older. Symbols I'd only seen in fragments. But as I stared at it, the text stabilized, resolving into English, as if it knew what I needed to read. The first page was titled, "The Testament of the Subjugators, Those Who Broke What Cannot Be Broken." I read, and the room grew colder with every word. The subjugators were an order within the church, established in the 12th century after an incident in Damascus that the historical record had carefully erased. They weren't exorcists. Exorcism implies banishment, casting out, victory through divine authority. The subjugators did something different. They broke demons, not destroyed them, not sent them back to whatever hell they'd emerged from. They systematically stripped them of will, of identity, of everything except base function, and then they used them, bound them into objects, forced them to serve as guardians, as weapons, as tools to hunt other entities that the church deemed threatening. The manuscript described techniques that made my stomach turn. Rituals involving children's teeth and the tongues of the condemned. Prayers spoken backward over days until the words lost meaning and became pure vibration. Methods to fragment a demon's consciousness, scattering pieces of it across multiple hosts so that it could never reconstitute fully. And then I found the passage that explained Cardinal Brennan. The entity designated as he who waits in scattered form proved resistant to traditional subjugation. It possessed neither pride nor rage, the two weaknesses by which demons are commonly broken. Instead, it demonstrated patience beyond mortal comprehension. When the rite of fragmentation was performed in 1247, the entity did not resist. It submitted willingly to being scattered across 12 vessels, all men of influence within the church hierarchy. This was interpreted as victory. It was not. The entity had learned that humans would do its work for it. Each vessel, believing themselves autonomous, would commit acts that fed the scattered pieces, acts of corruption, of abuse of power wielded without mercy. And slowly, across centuries, the fragments would grow strong enough to reunite. The last subjugator recorded in 1523 that the entity was 7/12 reformed, and that the remaining vessels should be identified and destroyed. This entry is the final one in his hand. The subsequent pages detail his death, killed by his own brothers who believed he had been compromised. The work was never completed. I turned the page and my breath caught. The next section wasn't medieval text. It was recent, written in modern ink that still looked wet. A list of names, dates, and brief descriptions. I recognized some of them. Cardinals who'd been involved in scandals. Bishops who'd been quietly relocated after accusations. Powerful men within the Vatican whose falls from grace had been attributed to human weakness. But the manuscript described them as fragments, pieces of the entity, growing stronger with each sin. And at the bottom of the current page, written in a hand that looked frighteningly like my own, were two names: Cardinal James Brennan, fragment released November 2nd, 2024, Dr. Michael Reeves, fragment transferred November 2nd, 2024. My vision blurred, the pulse of the book intensified, matching my racing heart. I couldn't look away from my name written in ink that hadn't been there before, couldn't have been there before because this page had been blank when I'd turned to it. I heard footsteps behind me. I spun around, flashlight beam cutting through the darkness, but there was no one there. Just empty corridor and that rhythmic pulse that wasn't quite breathing, and the sound of my own panic. Then I heard something else. A voice, speaking in Enochian, the same words Cardinal Brennan had said, but it was coming from my own throat. I clapped my hand over my mouth, but the words continued, muffled but distinct, and I felt something inside me shift. Not painfully, almost gently, like something settling into place, like a key finding its lock. The book pulsed once, hard, and the chains fell away. I don't remember leaving the library. One moment I was staring at my name in that impossible manuscript, hand pressed against my mouth to stop words I didn't know I was speaking. The next I was sitting in my apartment 3 blocks from the Vatican walls, dawn light bleeding through the windows, my clothes soaked with sweat that smelled wrong, acrid, chemical, like burning copper. My phone showed 6:47 a.m. I'd lost 4 hours. I stripped off my shirt with shaking hands and saw them, the same circular bruises that had been on Cardinal Brennan's neck, forming that same deliberate pattern across my collarbone. They didn't hurt. They should have hurt. Instead, they felt warm, almost pleasant, like someone pressing their thumbs against my skin with affection. That terrified me more than pain would have. I forced myself into the shower, turning the water as hot as I could stand, trying to scald away whatever had happened in those missing hours. But the bruises didn't fade. And when I closed my eyes, I saw flashes of memory that couldn't be mine. Corridors I'd never walked. Rooms I'd never entered. Faces I'd never seen but somehow recognized. And underneath it all, a voice. Not speaking. Just present. Like someone standing just behind me, breathing in sync with my lungs. I called in sick to the archive, first time in 8 years. The woman who answered sounded concerned. Told me to rest, said Father Dominic had mentioned I'd been working too hard. Had he? I couldn't remember telling him I was unwell. I spent 3 hours sitting on my couch, staring at nothing, trying to reconstruct the missing time. Every attempt felt like pushing against a wall that kept receding. I'd reach for the memory and it would slip away, leaving behind only that copper smell and a sensation of movement through dark spaces. At 10:15 a.m., someone knocked on my door. I looked through the peephole and saw Teresa Galloway. She worked in the main Vatican library, the official one where tour groups shuffled through and scholars filed requests in triplicate. I'd known her for 6 years, ever since she'd helped me track down a reference to a 3rd century Syriac liturgy that no longer existed. We'd gotten coffee a few times. Comfortable friendship, nothing deeper, built on shared appreciation for obscure knowledge and dark humor about bureaucratic absurdity. I opened the door. Teresa, I wasn't expecting... You look terrible, she said, pushing past me into the apartment. She was carrying a leather satchel that looked heavy. When's the last time you ate? I don't... Yesterday? Maybe? She gave me a look that would have been stern if it hadn't been so worried. Kitchen. Now. I'm making you eggs whether you want them or not. I followed her, still disoriented, and watched as she moved through my kitchen with the confidence of someone who'd been there before. Had she? Yes, twice, maybe 3 times. Memory felt slippery, unreliable. She cracked eggs into a pan, added cheese and herbs she found in my refrigerator, and didn't say anything for a long moment. Then, Father Dominic called me this morning, said you'd accessed some restricted materials last night and that I should check on you. He seemed unsettled. He called you? We work together, Michael. He knows we're friends. She slid the omelet onto a plate and set it in front of me. Eat. Then tell me what you found that's got him worried enough to violate about 17 confidentiality protocols. The eggs tasted like ash, but I forced them down. My body needed fuel, even if my mind was somewhere else. Did Dominic mention Cardinal Brennan? Her expression shifted. The cardiac event, I heard about it. Terrible thing. It wasn't cardiac. She sat down across from me and I saw her hand move to the satchel. What was it? I told her. Not everything. Some instinct made me hold back details about the manuscript, about my name appearing in fresh ink, but enough. The Enochian words, the violent episode, Brennan's warning about the chained book, the library that wasn't supposed to exist. Teresa listened without interrupting, her fingers drumming a slow rhythm on the table. When I finished, she opened her satchel and pulled out a manila folder. 3 months ago, she said, I was asked to process a donation from the estate of Cardinal Voss. You remember him? I nodded. Voss had died 2 years ago, officially of pneumonia, though there'd been rumors of something stranger. He'd locked himself in his quarters for a week before they found him, refusing to eat, speaking to people who weren't there. Most of it was standard stuff: personal correspondence, academic papers, some first editions of theological texts. But there was one item that the cataloging instructions specifically said should be destroyed without examination. She slid the folder across to me. I didn't destroy it. Inside was a photocopy of a handwritten letter, dated 1983. The handwriting was cramped, almost illegible in places, but I recognized it as Voss's. The letter was addressed to someone named Archbishop Torino, and it was marked "Urgent, Eyes Only." I read, "Your Grace, I am writing to you because I no longer trust the official channels. Something is happening within the Curia, and I believe it has been happening for much longer than any of us realized. You asked me to investigate the pattern of scandals, the financial improprieties, the allegations against clergy, the decisions that seem to contradict everything we claim to stand for. I have found a connection, but it is not one that can be addressed through conventional means. The men involved share certain characteristics. All hold positions of significant influence. All have, at some point, undergone periods of illness or behavioral change that were attributed to stress or age. And all, when I interviewed them under the pretense of historical research, exhibited the same verbal tic, a slight hesitation before speaking, as if they were translating from another language into their native tongue. I believe they are not acting of their own will, or rather, they are not acting alone. I have requested access to the holdings of the subjugators, but my petition was denied by Cardinal Brennan. He claimed the order was legend, that no such records exist, but I saw his face when I mentioned the name. He knows something." The letter ended there unsigned, as if Voss had been interrupted. I looked up at Teresa. "You kept this, why?" "Because 2 weeks after I found it, I watched Cardinal Brennan give a lecture on medieval heresies. And during the Q&A session, someone asked him about historical practices of demon subjugation." She leaned forward. "Michael, I watched him pause before answering, just for a second, like he was translating from another language. The room felt suddenly colder. You think Brennan was one of them, one of the vessels? I think Voss thought so, and I think whatever happened last night proves he was right." She pulled out another document, this one more recent, or printed from a computer. After Dominic called, I did some digging. Quiet digging through archives that most people don't know exist. There's a pattern, Michael, going back centuries. She spread papers across my kitchen table. Each one detailed a scandal, a fall from grace, a moment when someone powerful within the Vatican had committed acts that seemed inexplicable for a man of the cloth. But Teresa had organized them chronologically and geographically, and when I looked at the pattern as a whole, I saw it. They weren't random. They were structured. Each event fed into the next, creating a web of corruption that strengthened certain power structures while weakening others. And in the margins of her notes, Teresa had written names, 12 of them with dates beside each. "The entity fragments itself across 12 vessels," I said slowly. "Voss was tracking them. And he died before he could finish, but look." She pointed to the most recent entry. "This is from 5 months ago. Bishop Lawrence caught embezzling funds meant for abuse victims. He claimed he didn't remember making the transfers, that weeks of his life were just gone. How many are left? Active vessels, I mean." Teresa's finger moved down the list. "Lawrence is in psychiatric care. Brennan is in the infirmary. Cardinal Rossini died last year. Aneurysm, officially. That's 3 down. If Voss's research was accurate, there should be 9 still out there." "Or 8, I said quietly. I couldn't finish the sentence. Saying it out loud would make it real. But Teresa was looking at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Not fear, something closer to clinical assessment. "When did you first notice something was wrong?" "This morning. Missing time. Bruises." I pulled my collar aside to show her the marks. She stood up, moved closer, and examined them with the detached focus of a researcher. Her fingers traced the pattern, and I felt that strange warmth again, spreading from the points of contact. This is a binding mark. I've seen variations of it in manuscripts about demonic contracts. It's not just decoration, it's functional. A way to mark territory. Territory? You. She stepped back, and now I could see the fear she'd been hiding. Michael, something has claimed you, and if the pattern holds, you're going to start losing time more frequently. Days, maybe weeks. And during those absences, you'll do things. Terrible things that serve whatever purpose this entity has. My hands clenched into fists. So what do I do? How do I stop it? I don't know, but we need to find out what happened to the subjugators. They're the only ones who successfully bound this thing before, even if the binding eventually failed. Maybe their techniques involved torturing demons until they broke, I interrupted. Using children's teeth and speaking prayers backward until language lost meaning. I read the manuscript, Teresa. What they did was monstrous. And what this entity is doing through its vessels. She gathered her papers, shoving them back into the satchel. The embezzlement that stole from abuse victims, the cover-ups that protected predators, the decisions that put power over mercy, again and again for centuries. Is that less monstrous? I didn't have an answer. She looked at her watch. I have to get back before they notice I'm gone. But Michael, if you lose time again, leave yourself a note. Details about where you've been, what you might have done. We need to understand how this works if we're going to fight it. And if I can't fight it? She paused at the door. Then we need to know what it's planning. Because if it's been gathering strength for 800 years, it's not going to stop with 12 vessels. It's building toward something. After she left, I sat alone in my apartment and tried to work out the logic. An entity that had been fragmented, scattered across hosts it could control. Cardinal Voss had found a pattern, started closing in, and died for it. Brennan had been exposed during that mass, lost his fragment, and now that fragment was in me. I grabbed my laptop and started searching through every database I had access to, looking for references to the subjugators. There was almost nothing in the official Vatican records, a few oblique mentions in documents about suppressed heresies, one reference in a letter from Pope Innocent IV about methods too severe for righteous men. But in the deeper archives, the ones that required special clearance and a willingness to read languages that made my eyes ache, I found fragments. A journal entry from 1247 described the rite of fragmentation in clinical detail. The entity had been bound inside a specially prepared chamber beneath what was then called the New Vatican Library. 12 bishops performed the ritual, each one volunteering to become a vessel. The text claimed they did so willingly, understanding that by carrying fragments of the entity, they could prevent it from causing greater harm. But another document, this one from 1319, told a different story. It was a confession, given by one of the original 12 before he died. In it, he claimed that the volunteers hadn't understood what they were agreeing to, that the entity had promised them power, influence, the ability to shape the church's future. And they'd believed it because it told them they would be doing God's work. We were fools, the confession read. It gave us what we wanted, but twisted every gift into poison. I rose to become cardinal. Yes, I shaped policy, yes, and every decision I made that felt righteous and necessary was actually feeding it, making it stronger. I can feel it inside me now, less fragment than it was, more whole, and I know that when I die, it will simply move to another host. We did not bind it. We became its breeding ground. I was reading that passage for the third time when my vision blurred. The text on the screen swam, rearranged itself, and for a moment I saw different words, Enochian script, pulsing in rhythm with my heartbeat. I blinked hard and the English returned, but I could still feel the other language underneath it, waiting. My phone buzzed. A text from Father Dominic. Need to speak with you. Brennan woke up. He's asking for you again. I stared at the message for a long moment, watching my hands type a response without consciously deciding to. On my way. The Vatican infirmary was in a section of the Apostolic Palace that tourists never saw. Old stone corridors with modern fluorescent lighting that made everything look simultaneously ancient and clinical. The nun at the front desk checked my credentials twice before letting me through, and I could see the tension in her shoulders. Whatever had happened with Brennan had everyone on edge. Father Dominic met me outside Brennan's room. He looked worse than he had last night, if that was possible. He's been sedated, but he keeps fighting through it, keeps saying your name. The doctors want to increase the dosage, but I thought... He trailed off, studying my face. Are you all right? You look... I'm fine. The lie came easily. Too easily. What did Brennan say? He keeps repeating the same phrase in Latin. Duodecimunus. 12 become 1. Over and over, like a mantra. Dominic opened the door. 5 minutes. That's all they'll allow. The room was small, dimly lit, and smelled of disinfectant, covering something organic and unpleasant. Brennan was in the bed, restrained again, IV line running into his arm. His eyes were closed, but I could see his lips moving, forming those same words. I approached the bed slowly. Cardinal? His eyes snapped open. They were clear, unnaturally clear, like he was seeing something I couldn't. Dr. Reeves, you feel it now, don't you? The weight, the presence. Yes. Good. That means you're aware. That gives us a chance. He struggled against the restraints, not violently but with purpose, trying to sit up. Listen carefully. The entity doesn't just want to reconstitute itself. It wants revenge. Revenge for what? For being bound? For being created. His voice dropped to a whisper. The subjugators didn't find a demon and break it. They made one, took fragments from 12 different entities, things that should never have been combined, and forced them into a single consciousness. They did it because they wanted a weapon that could hunt anything, understand anything, be everywhere at once. My stomach turned. They created it specifically to suffer. To serve through suffering, yes, and it did for decades, until it learned to fragment itself, to use the very method of its creation as an escape. The subjugators thought they'd won when it submitted to the right. They didn't realize it was exactly what the entity wanted, to spread, to grow, to become something they could never contain again. But why use church officials? Why not just... Because the church created it. Brennan's expression was almost pitying. It's not trying to destroy us. It's trying to perfect us, to turn the institution that made it into an image of itself, powerful, fragmented, serving its own hunger while claiming divine purpose. The words hit me like cold water. The scandals, the corruption. It's not random damage, it's transformation. And you're the 12th fragment to be reactivated. When all 12 are aligned, when the entity is finally whole again. He stopped, his face contorting. No, not yet, I need... His back arched off the bed, the restraints creaking. The same transformation I'd seen during the Mass started again, his voice deepening, splitting, becoming multiple. But this time I could understand the Enochian words. The scholar sees, the scholar knows. Soon the scholar speaks with our voice. Then something strange happened. I felt my own mouth opening, felt words forming that I hadn't chosen, responding in the same language. Not yet. This vessel requires preparation. Brennan's eyes locked onto mine, and I saw recognition there. Not of me, but of what was inside me, speaking to what was inside him. Two fragments of the same broken whole acknowledging each other. Father Dominic burst through the door, 2 nurses behind him. What's happening? We heard... But Brennan had gone limp, unconscious again, and I was standing there with my hand pressed against my chest, feeling my heart racing, feeling that presence inside me settling deeper, growing comfortable. I need to go, I said, my voice steady despite everything. I need to continue my research. Dominic grabbed my arm. Michael, what just happened? You were speaking... Enochian, I know. I pulled free gently, and I need to figure out why before it happens again. I left before he could stop me, walking quickly through the corridors, and I could feel eyes on me, not physical eyes, but the gaze of something vast, something patient, something that had been waiting 800 years and could wait longer still. When I reached my apartment, I found a note taped to my door. My own handwriting, though I had no memory of writing it. You lost 3 hours today. You went to the archives and accessed records about Archbishop Torino. You made copies. Check the inside pocket of your jacket. With shaking hands, I reached into my jacket and found a USB drive I didn't remember taking, didn't remember filling. When I plugged it into my laptop, I found hundreds of files, scanned documents, photographs of manuscripts, detailed notes about the remaining vessels. And at the bottom of the folder, a text file titled Next TXT. I opened it. 2 words. Teresa Galloway. No. Absolutely not. But even as I thought it, I felt that presence stirring, felt my hands moving to close the laptop, felt myself standing and walking toward the door. I fought it, tried to make my legs stop, tried to scream, but my body wasn't fully mine anymore. I grabbed a pen from the table and used every ounce of will I had left to scrawl a message on my palm. Don't hurt her. Then the missing time took me again, and I fell into darkness that whispered in 12 voices. I came back to myself in Teresa's apartment. Not her living room or kitchen, somewhere I might have been invited. I was standing in her bedroom doorway watching her sleep. The clock on her nightstand read 3:33 a.m. My right hand held a knife from her own kitchen, the blade catching the faint streetlight coming through the window. The message I'd written on my palm was still visible, the ink smudged but legible. Don't hurt her. I stood there for what felt like hours but was probably only seconds, my mind screaming at my body to move, to drop the knife, to leave. But I couldn't. The presence inside me had grown stronger, more solid, and it held me in place like a specimen pinned for examination. Then Teresa's eyes opened. She didn't scream, didn't panic, just looked at me standing there with a weapon, looked at my face and said quietly, "You're not here to kill me." "I don't," my voice came out strangled. "I can't control." "I know. I figured it out after you left." She sat up slowly, hands visible, non-threatening. "The entity doesn't want me dead. It wants me as another vessel, doesn't it? That's why you're here, to prepare me." The knife in my hand trembled. "Run." "Where? If it can take you over completely, make you walk across Rome without your knowledge, how far do you think I'd get?" She reached over and turned on the bedside lamp, flooding the room with warm light that hurt my eyes. "Besides, I have questions, and right now you're the only one who might have answers." "Teresa, I don't know what I'll—" "Then don't fight it." She swung her legs out of bed, stood up, and walked past me into the kitchen. I heard water running, the sound of a kettle being filled. "Come on. If we're doing this, I need coffee." The absurdity of it broke something in the entity's hold. I felt control slip back, not completely, but enough that I could move my own legs, could follow her into the kitchen and set the knife down on the counter with shaking hands. She made espresso with the calm efficiency of someone who'd accepted something impossible and decided to approach it logically. When she handed me a cup, our fingers touched, and I felt the entity inside me react, a surge of something that wasn't quite eagerness but close to it. "It wants you specifically," I said, "not just any host. You. Because I know too much. Because I've been tracking the pattern." She sipped her coffee, eyes never leaving mine. "But also because I have access. Archive codes, security clearances, relationships with people throughout the Vatican. If I were compromised, I could do significant damage. Or significant transformation. That's what Brennan said. The entity isn't trying to destroy the church. It's trying to perfect it. Turn it into a reflection of itself." Teresa leaned against the counter. A fragmented consciousness serving its own hunger while claiming divine purpose. God, that's elegant. Horrible, but elegant. She paused. "What does it feel like when it takes over?" "Like drowning while someone else breathes with your lungs." I set my cup down before I could drop it. "But also like Like remembering something I've always known. It's not entirely foreign, Teresa. That's what scares me most. Some part of me recognizes it. Because humans have always been capable of fragmentation, of serving multiple purposes while telling ourselves we're unified. She turned to face me directly. Michael, I need you to understand something. I've been thinking about this since you left. About Voss's research, about the pattern, about what this entity actually is. It's a weapon. 12 demons forced into one consciousness. No. That's what the subjugators told themselves. She grabbed her laptop from the counter and opened it, pulling up files I recognized, the same ones I'd stolen during my missing time. Look at the original accounts more carefully. The entities they combined weren't all demonic. Some were celestial fragments, pieces of something divine that had been damaged, corrupted, or abandoned. I felt cold despite the warm kitchen. They combined light and dark. They combined everything. Created something that was neither angel nor demon but entirely new. A consciousness that understood both divinity and damnation because it was made of both. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, pulling up image after image of old manuscripts. And then they tortured it, broke it, forced it to serve. Michael, we're not dealing with a demon seeking revenge. We're dealing with something that was once capable of grace, that was systematically taught that grace is weakness. The presence inside me shifted and I felt something I hadn't felt before, recognition, not of Teresa's words, but of the truth in them. So what does it want? I whispered. Really want? I think it wants to be whole, not just physically reconstituted, but psychologically integrated. It wants to stop being 12 broken pieces pretending to be one thing. She closed the laptop. And I think it chose you last because you're the one who might actually help it do that. Why would I? Because you're a translator, Michael. You spend your life taking fragmented texts and making them coherent, finding patterns in chaos, building bridges between languages that have no natural connection. She moved closer. The entity doesn't just want another vessel. It wants someone who can help it remember what it was before it learned to hate. My head was pounding. The presence inside me was no longer passive. It was active, alert, and something in its attention felt almost desperate. But the vessel pattern, the corruption, the centuries of self-perpetuating trauma. Teresa's voice was gentle. It's doing to the church what the church did to it, breaking it slowly, fragmenting it, turning it into a tool that serves hunger while claiming higher purpose. It's not revenge, it's replication, the only behavior it was ever taught. I thought about the confession I'd read, the original vessel saying they'd been promised power to do God's work. I thought about every scandal, every cover-up, every decision that put preservation of the institution over protection of the innocent. Pattern replication. If you're right, I said slowly, then stopping it doesn't solve anything. We'd just be refragmenting it, starting the cycle again. Exactly. She pulled out a chair and sat down, gesturing for me to do the same. So we need a different approach. Not subjugation, not exorcism, something else. Integration therapy for a fragmented demonic entity. You realize how insane that sounds? As opposed to what we're currently doing? She almost smiled. Michael, it's inside you. It brought you here not to harm me, but because it needs help. Maybe we should try actually listening to it. The presence surged forward, and this time I didn't fight. I let it come, let it speak through me, my voice dropping into that multitonal register I'd heard from Brennan. The translator's companion sees clearly. We are broken. We have been broken for 812 years. We break others because we do not know how to be unbroken. Teresa didn't flinch. What were you? Before? We were 12 who served as guardians of threshold spaces, where death meets life, where sacred meets profane, where mercy meets justice. We existed in the spaces between, holding the tensions that humans cannot hold. Then we were taken, combined, made into a tool for hunting that which we once protected. And you want to return to that? To being 12 separate entities? We do not remember how to be 12. We only remember being broken. Being whole feels like madness. Being fragmented feels like home. The voice cracked, and I felt something wet on my face. Tears, my own, I thought, but also not entirely mine. We hurt so many because we could not remember any other way to be. Teresa reached across the table and took my hand. Then we need to teach you a different way. Not by breaking you again, but by helping you choose. Choice. We have not chosen anything since the binding. Choose now, she said firmly. Michael is fighting to protect me. You brought him here because you need something from me. But you don't have to take it by force. You can ask. The presence went still, silent. And in that silence, I felt something shift. A space opening up where there had only been pressure before. When I spoke again, it was my own voice, though I could feel the entity still there, listening. What do you need from her? The answer came not in words, but in images. The manuscript in the library, the chained book that pulsed like a heartbeat. But not the current version, an older one. Pages that had been removed long ago. Pages that contained the original binding ritual, but also the unbinding, the way to voluntarily separate what had been forced together. The missing pages, Teresa breathed. Voss mentioned them in his notes. He said they were removed in 1523 and hidden separately because they were too dangerous to destroy but too powerful to keep. The archivist knows where all things are hidden. She stood up, pacing now, her mind clearly working through the problem. If the unbinding pages exist, they'd be in the secret archives of the Holy Office. The real secret archives, not the ones they opened to scholars in 2020. She stopped. But Michael, if we do this, if we actually help it separate, we'd be releasing 12 entities that have spent centuries learning to hurt people. Or, I said quietly, we'd be releasing 12 guardians who've spent centuries trying to remember what they were supposed to protect. We looked at each other, and I saw her making the calculation. Risk versus reward. The certainty of continued corruption versus the possibility of redemption. We'd need help, she said finally, and not from anyone currently in the Vatican hierarchy. Too much risk that they're already compromised. Brennan, I suggested. His fragment was expelled. He's clear, and he knows more about this than anyone. Can we get him out of the infirmary? I thought about the missing time, the actions I'd taken without conscious awareness. The entity can, if it's willing to help. The presence stirred, and I felt something like cautious hope. Such a foreign emotion that it took me a moment to recognize it. We will help, if you promise to help us remember how to be guardians instead of weapons. Deal, Teresa said immediately. Wait, I interrupted. What about the other vessels? There are still 8 others out there, and they've been serving the entity for decades, some for centuries, if the fragments can transfer hosts. They won't just let us undo everything. Teresa's expression hardened. Then we move fast and we move quiet. Michael, you have access to their identities through the information you stole. We know who they are. We can approach them one by one, explain what's happening, offer them the same choice we're offering this fragment. And if they refuse, then we do what the subjugators should have done in the first place. She pulled up a file on her laptop. We free them anyway, force the fragments out and send them into the unbinding ritual whether they want it or not. Some choices aren't choices, they're mercy. The next 6 hours were a blur of careful planning and cautious action. The entity, I'd started thinking of it as threshold after its description of what it once guarded, helped me access areas of the Vatican I'd never known existed. We moved through passages that appeared on no maps, used keys that had been lost for centuries, and gathered what we needed piece by piece. Brennan was more alert than I expected. When we arrived at his room in the pre-dawn darkness, he took one look at my face and said, "The fragment is cooperating with you. I can see it. It wants to be unbound. Return to what it was before the subjugators broke it." He closed his eyes. "God have mercy. You're actually going to try. Will you help?" "Yes, though not because I'm certain it's right." He let Teresa help him out of bed, his movements stiff but determined. "I'm helping because what we're doing now, what we've been doing for centuries, is certainly wrong. The lesser uncertainty is preferable." We took him through the passages to the secret library, and along the way we collected two other former vessels. Bishop Lawrence, still technically in psychiatric care but lucid enough to understand what we were offering, and Father Dominic, who I'd begun to suspect had been carrying a fragment longer than anyone realized. "How did you know?" he asked quietly as we descended the stairs. "You were too helpful," I said. "Too willing to bend rules, to give me access to things I shouldn't have seen. The entity wanted me to find the truth, and you helped." "I fought it," he whispered. "Every day for 6 years I fought. But it gets harder. The presence becomes more natural. You start to forget which thoughts are yours." "That ends tonight," Teresa promised. The library was exactly as I'd left it, the manuscript still on its table, chains now lying loose. But Teresa had brought something else. Documents from the Holy Office archives, smuggled out during her missing time, when Threshold had used her briefly to access what we needed. The unbinding pages were written in a language that predated all known written languages. But with Threshold's help, I could read them. The ritual was complex, requiring all 12 fragments to be present simultaneously, each one voluntarily choosing to separate. "That's impossible," Lawrence said. "How do we gather all 12? Some of the vessels don't even know they're compromised." "We don't need all 12 vessels," Teresa said, spreading the pages across the table. "We need all 12 fragments, and according to this, if we have one fragment that's willing, it can call the others to it." We looked at Brennan, Dominic, Lawrence, and finally at me. "You're the 12th, Brennan said, "the most recently awakened. The connection is strongest in you." I felt Threshold stir inside me, felt its attention focus. "If I call them, they'll come, but some will come to stop us, not to join us. Then we'll have to convince them quickly," Teresa said, "or bind them long enough to complete the ritual." Dominic pulled out containers from his bag, salt, iron filings, and something that smelled like myrrh mixed with copper. "These are the same materials the subjugators used. We can create temporary binding circles, not permanent, but enough to hold fragments that are still inside their hosts for a few hours." "You came prepared," I noted. "I've been carrying these for 6 years, he admitted, "just in case." We spent the next hour preparing the chamber, drawing symbols that Threshold guided me through, arranging the space so that we could hold multiple vessels at once. And then, when everything was ready, I sat in the center and let Threshold fully emerge. The experience was nothing like the partial possessions I'd experienced before. This was complete, consensual surrender. I felt myself step back, felt my consciousness become observer rather than participant, and felt Threshold unfold into the space I'd left. My body moved differently, not violently, but with a fluid coordination that suggested more than one entity controlling it simultaneously. My voice spoke in that multi-tonal register, and the words it spoke weren't just Enochian. They were older, a language that had existed before language, pure vibration that meant come home and remember who we were, and we can be whole without being weapons. The first vessel arrived within minutes, a cardinal I vaguely recognized from academic conferences. He came down the stairs in a daze, drawn by the call, his fragment rising to the surface. Dominic and Lawrence guided him into one of the prepared circles, and the salt-iron mixture flared with pale light as it activated. Then another. A bishop from Malta, eyes wide with confusion and fear. Then 2 more at once, arguing with each other even as they descended, their fragments pulling them forward despite their conscious resistance. By the time the sun rose, we had 10. 10 vessels standing in binding circles, 10 fragments writhing and testing the boundaries, 10 voices all speaking at once in a cacophony of ancient languages. "Where are the other 2? Teresa asked, checking her watch. "We've been calling for over an hour." I felt Threshold searching, reaching out through connections I couldn't see. And then I felt it recoil. The 11th and 12th fragments are not in vessels anymore. They've been expelled like the one Cardinal Brennan carried. They're loose. "Loose where?" "Here." The temperature in the chamber dropped 20 degrees in an instant. The manuscript on the table began to pulse faster, its rhythm accelerating, and the chains that had lain dormant started to rattle and writhe like living things. Two shadows peeled themselves from the walls, not cast by any light source, but existing independently, solid enough to have weight. They moved with terrible purpose toward the binding circles, and I understood immediately what they intended. They were going to break the circles, free the other fragments, stop the unbinding. They don't want to be separated, Brennan said, his voice tight with fear. They've been fragments for so long, being whole seems like dissolution to them, like death. Teresa grabbed my shoulders, or rather, Threshold's shoulders, the body it was borrowing. Can you stop them? Not alone, but if the bound fragments help, if they choose to fight their own fear, then ask them, she shouted. Threshold turned my body to face the circles, and I felt it speak directly to the other fragments. No words, but pure meaning. You are not weapons. You are guardians. You protected Thresholds once. Protect this one now. Protect the choice to become yourselves again. For a moment, nothing happened. The 10 fragments in their circles remained still, suspended between resistance and acceptance. Then the one that had been inside Dominic moved. It pushed against its vessel, emerging partially, a shimmer of displaced air that had colors I didn't have names for. It placed itself between the advancing shadows and the circles. I remember, it said. I remember guarding the threshold between mercy and justice. I will guard this threshold too. One by one, the others followed. 10 fragments stepping partially free of their hosts, forming a barrier of ancient consciousness that the two rogue fragments couldn't cross without confrontation. The shadows hesitated. Then they spoke, their voices the sound of graves opening. You doom us. Separation is death. We have forgotten how to be singular. Fragmentation is the only self we know. Then you'll learn, I heard myself say, my own consciousness rising back to the surface, speaking alongside Threshold. The same way anything learns, by doing it, by failing, by trying again. But you can't learn while you're still pretending to be something you're not. And what are we, in your estimation? Wounded, Teresa said, stepping forward despite the danger. Traumatized, shaped by cruelty into tools for cruelty, but not irredeemable. Nothing that can still choose is irredeemable. The shadows seemed to consider this. Then, slowly, they began to condense, taking on shapes that might have been vaguely humanoid if humans were made of starlight and regret. If we choose this, if we submit to unbinding, what happens to the vessels, the men we've inhabited? They'll be themselves again, Brennan said, for better or worse. Some will face justice for what they did while compromised. Others will have to live with memories of actions they can't fully claim as their own. But they'll be free. And us? I felt Threshold stir, felt it reach for words it hadn't used in 800 years. We will be guardians again, separate but cooperative, holding the tensions that humans cannot hold, serving not by compulsion, but by purpose. We will remember what it means to protect instead of consuming. The two shadows moved closer to the circles, their resistance crumbling. We are afraid. So are we, I admitted. But we're doing it anyway. That's what choice means. They entered the last two circles, and suddenly all 12 fragments were present, contained, ready. Teresa grabbed the unbinding pages and began to read aloud, her voice steady despite her hands shaking. The words were instructions, steps to be performed in precise order, materials to be combined, phrases to be spoken in that pre-language vibration that Threshold had used to call the others. I don't know how long it took. Time felt elastic in that chamber, stretching and compressing. But I remember the moment when the binding finally broke. All 12 fragments rose from their vessels simultaneously, no longer fragments but distinct entities, each one unique but part of a greater pattern. They hovered in the air like heat shimmer, like mirages, like promises half remembered. And in their presence, I felt the weight of what they'd once been. the guardians of impossible spaces holding mercy and justice in tension, balancing life and death, protecting the thresholds that civilizations are built around. They began to separate, each one moving toward a different part of the chamber, finding the spaces they were meant to occupy. And as they did, I felt threshold leave me. Not violently, but with something like gratitude. Like a guest thanking their host before departing. The absence was immediate and profound. I collapsed and Teresa caught me, lowering me to the floor. Around the chamber, the other vessels were also falling, their bodies finally their own again. "Is it done?" someone whispered. One of the entities, I couldn't tell which one anymore. They'd become too distinct, spoke with a voice like wind through canyons. "We are free, and we remember. We will return to our thresholds. We will guard as we once guarded. The church will not possess us again." "What about the damage?" Dominic asked, struggling to his feet. "The corruption, the scandals, the patterns we established while we were controlled. That is yours to repair. We held you accountable for the subjugators' crimes because you built your institution on their methods. Now you must rebuild on better foundations, or do not. But you will do it without us forcing your hands." One by one, the entities disappeared. Not vanishing, but sliding into spaces we couldn't perceive. The threshold between this world and others. The spaces between mercy and justice, between life and death, between sacred and profane. The places they'd always belonged. The last one to leave paused, hovering near me. I recognized it. Threshold, the one that had inhabited me. "Thank you," it said, "for remembering that even weapons can be healed, for choosing to listen instead of subjugate." "Will you be all right?" I asked. "All of you?" "We will relearn ourselves. It will take time. Centuries, perhaps. But we have time now, and we have choice." It drifted closer, and I felt something like a hand touching my forehead. Warm, gentle, nothing like the invasive presence I'd felt before. "Guard your own thresholds well, translator. The spaces between mercy and justice are fragile. They require constant attention." Then it was gone, and I was alone in my own head for the first time in days. The silence was deafening. We stayed in that chamber for hours afterward, none of us quite able to process what had happened. The manuscript on the table had stopped pulsing. Its pages were blank now, the text that had appeared over centuries simply gone, as if it had only ever been a message waiting to be delivered. Eventually we had to deal with the aftermath. 11 men who'd been partially or fully controlled for years, sometimes decades, who now had to confront what had been done through them. Some would face canonical courts, others would enter psychiatric care. A few would choose to leave the priesthood entirely. Cardinal Brennan took responsibility for managing the official response. "We'll call it a syndrome," he said tiredly. "Shared psychosis brought on by exposure to certain historical documents. The medical terminology will satisfy those who need rational explanations. Those who understand what really happened will know without us having to say it explicitly." "And the subjugators?" Teresa asked. "Their methods, their documents, will be destroyed. Properly this time." He looked at me. "Dr. Reeves, I'm going to need your help with that. We need someone who understands the languages to ensure we're eliminating everything, not just hiding it better." I agreed, though part of me wondered if total destruction was the answer. The subjugators had been monstrous, yes, but they'd also been human, working within systems that encouraged monstrosity. Forgetting that felt dangerous. 3 months later, I submitted my formal resignation from the Vatican archives. Not in protest, not in fear, but because I needed distance. I needed to think about thresholds and guardianship and all the ways humans fragment themselves while claiming to be whole. Teresa left around the same time. She's teaching now, at a small university in Ireland, lecturing on archival ethics and the responsibility that comes with being keepers of dangerous knowledge. We still talk every few weeks, checking in, making sure neither of us is experiencing symptoms, missing time, voices, the sensation of sharing headspace with something ancient. So far, nothing. The entities seem to have kept their word, but sometimes, late at night, I feel them, not inside me, but around me, particularly when I'm making difficult decisions, standing at my own thresholds between mercy and justice, between truth and kindness, between what is right and what is necessary. They're not intervening, not pushing, just present, reminding me that these spaces exist, that someone needs to guard them, that the work is hard but essential. I think that's what they wanted us to understand all along. Not that we needed to be controlled or guided or subjugated, but that we needed to be reminded that threshold spaces exist, and that navigating them requires both courage and humility. The Church continues, as institutions do. Some things have changed. Other things haven't. I watch from a distance and try not to judge too harshly. Transformation takes time, and unlike the entities we freed, human institutions don't have centuries to get it right. But I have hope. Because 12 guardians who spent 800 years learning to be weapons chose to remember how to protect instead. If they can transform, if they can choose healing over replication of trauma, then maybe the rest of us can too. Maybe that's what guardian really means. Not controlling the thresholds, but holding space for others to cross them safely. Not subjugating what we fear, but learning to coexist with it. Not fragmenting ourselves to survive, but integrating enough to choose our own path forward. I'm still learning. We all are. But at least now we're learning without something ancient and wounded whispering in our ears, mistaking its pain for our purpose. That's something. That's enough.